It's October, the spookiest month of the year. I love a good, scary story. So today, I'm going to share 13 of my favorite scary stories with you. I'm Allie, the literary sewist. Here in my crafting castle, I create projects inspired by the books I review. So sit back, grab your favorite Halloween treat, and let me help you find the perfect story for your next Halloween read. And don't let the boogeyman scare you away from subscribing to my channel for future installments of all the bookish sewing goodness I have in store. I've read a lot of scary stories in my life. I absolutely love them. It's one of my favorite genres. In the last few years, I haven't read as many of them as I would like, so I'd like to jump back in. But today I'm going to share with you some stories that might fit your personality and your different reading tastes. First, let's talk about stories for those who don't like things too scary. The Ocean at the End of the Lane is the story of a middle-aged man who travels back to the neighborhood he grew up in, whose childhood home was down the street from a young girl named Letty. Her mother and grandmother and Letty lived on this little farm at the end of the lane. Letty believed that the pond on her property was actually an ocean. Life in our main character's childhood was a little rough, and one summer a new caretaker comes to live on the property, and she's a little different. He does not get along with this new caretaker, feels that she's trying to lead his family astray. Through the help of Letty, her mother, and her grandmother, he begins to experience a world of magic that he never even knew was possible. And things take some interesting twists. It does have a little spookiness on the edge of the story, but it's really a truly charming story in a way that only Neil Gaiman can tell. It's also a really great starting point if you've never read any of Neil Gaiman's works before. Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter by Seth Grahame-Smith. This story is told biography style through works that the author finds are actually Abraham Lincoln's personal private journals as a young man from childhood through his presidency. In these journals, we find out that Abraham Lincoln's mother actually died because of a vampire attack. When he found that out, he devoted his life to destroying these evil creatures and protecting the world around him. I desperately tried to get my daughter to believe that this was an actual biography and a true story. She just rolled her eyes at me and walked away. It was sad because I desperately wanted this story to be true, because how cool is that? One of our most beloved presidents was actually a vampire hunter. Come on. He was even apparently friends with Edgar Allan Poe. This was a really great, fun read, especially if you love historical fiction or alternative reality fiction. I even think some biography lovers might get a good kick out of it. Alright, for those of you who love classic literature, there are two that if you haven't already read them, you definitely need to pick them up. First is Bram Stoker's Dracula. The original tale actually focuses more on the heroes of the story rather than Dracula himself. It is uniquely told through a series of private letters, newspaper articles, and journals. The story touches on the Victorian time period's obsession with vampires and the occult, how the seduction of vampires can distort the societal norms. It's such a rich, in-depth story. It is a little bit different of a writing style, so it might not be for everybody, but if you love vampires, you really have to at least give it a try. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It is often considered the original science fiction novel. This story envelops Gothic horror with a dash of romance. Also told through a series of letters, we find out about Dr. Frankenstein's experiments and not understanding why he's doing it and how blasphemous what he is doing is, while the central storyline is telling us about Dr. Frankenstein and the methods he goes to create his monster. Eventually, we do hear from the monster's perspective as well. This gives us such a well-rounded perspective of what's going on at the time and through everyone's heads that are involved, and really kind of is such a perfect classic story, not just from a horror perspective or a science fiction perspective, but just as literature itself. It's fantastic. It's such a masterpiece that generations keep coming back to this one story because it is so incredible. Now for those of you with young, brave readers in the house, here's a few recommendations for you. The House of Dark Shadows by Robert Liparulo is the first story in the series The Dreamhouse Kings. Our story centers around a family who moves from LA out into the mountains, and they now live in this run-down, fixer-upper home with nobody around for miles. Xander, our main character, dreams of being a filmmaker, but he finds no inspiration in the new house that he's living in. He finds nothing that he wants to do, no friends to make. It's very difficult for him in this new situation. That is until some strange things begin happening around this new house, which lead to a previously undiscovered hallway where there are dozens of doors that lead to mysterious places. I did read this as an adult, but I found the writing and the story so captivating that I was really excited to keep reading, and the series was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I've recommended it to a lot of younger audiences. It's definitely geared towards middle grade readers. I think some advanced elementary school readers could handle it as well. It has some good creepy factor to it, but it's not overly scary. It's not gory, nothing like that. But it definitely keeps you on your toes, and it's got a good mystery going between each one of the books. It's a great time and definitely recommend picking it up. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. If you are a child who grew up in the 90s, you are probably very familiar with this collection of short stories. Think of it like the campfire tales or the sleepover tale that you and your friends would tell each other to scare the bejesus out of you. That's what this book is in these different short stories. There's a little bit of everything for everyone, so if you don't like one story, you might like the next one. It's a really fun read. It will definitely give you the heebie-jeebies. I know there are some full-grown adults that would be scared to death by some of these stories, so check them out. They're a lot of fun. It's a great way to introduce younger readers into the darker side of horror. For spooky stories, a lot of you probably expect ghost stories. So let's find a couple of good ghost stories that you might want to pick up. Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo takes place at modern day Yale with our main character Alex, who is a recruit into the freshman class. Alex is actually there because of her special abilities. She can see ghosts. Yale has some secret societies that delve into the occult. Alex is part of the Ninth House, or Leith House. She is in training to be kind of the protector to make sure that none of the other 8 main societies go too dark, do anything terrible that is going to disrupt the balance of what is going on here at Yale. It's definitely a mature novel, so go into it knowing that there are a few chapters that may be a little too dark for some people, not just because of this spooky occult side of things, but because of some realistic trigger type events that could be happening in the story. But it's wonderfully executed, fantastic story to follow. It is a first in a series as well, and I'm very much here for what happens next in Alex's story. The Haunting of Sunshine Girl by Paige Mackenzie. Sunshine grew up in the sun. She loves the sun, she adores the sun, it's who she is. She's Sunshine. Her mother gets a job at a hospital that takes her to the Pacific Northwest, where it's dark and more gloomy and it's wet all the time. She really doesn't vibe her life there at all. Something about the house that they move into seems off to her. She begins to hear screaming and crying, and things move around in her room and what is going on with her mom, and it's starting to freak her out. Originally, this was a YouTube webisode series starring Paige Mackenzie herself. I really love the ghost story aspect of it. It was so well put together. It had the great tropes of a ghost story in a haunted house that you could want. It's a lot of fun, and I still have yet to actually go and watch Paige's webisodes about this, so if you get a chance, check those out as well. But also the book is fantastic. For those of you who love a mix of reality with your horror, here's some recommendations for you. Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. 7 years ago, a mockumentary crew went out to the Marianas Trench to film their mockumentary. Things went completely wrong, and every single person in the cast and crew died, with no trace and very little proof of what happened. Now, an actual documentary crew and a team of scientists are heading out to the Marianas Trench to discover what happened on that fateful day. Much in the way that Michael Crichton gives you a lot of science and information and detail in his stories, Into the Drowning Deep really focuses in on the science of all of this. It brings it into such a realistic world that you want to know and believe in what happens in this story. This novel delivers a whole host of horror and fantasy and reality. It kept me on the edge of my seat that I actually had to stop and remind myself to breathe on more than one occasion. Pet Sematary by Stephen King. Let's be honest, I could do this entire list based on Stephen King stories. Pet Sematary happens to be one of my personal favorites. It deals with the trauma of losing a child, the stress of moving to a new town and starting a new job. It deals with disconnecting from reality. The main story centers around a sacred burial ground not too far from our main character's new home. It's said that anything that is buried there will come back to you. But will it be the same when it does? Okay, I know there are some of you out there who don't necessarily like scary horror, but what about thriller? You like the tension and the discomfort and the ways it can get into your brain and make you question what's going on in your own life. Let's talk about Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. This might be one of the most intense psychological thriller horror books I have ever read in my entire life. Nick and Amy Dunn are perceived as the perfect couple. On their 5th anniversary, Nick comes home, their house completely trashed, and his wife Amy is missing. Immediately, a search party is formed to look for her. The cops are all over the house trying to figure out what happened. Between the pressure of the media and Amy's parents, the investigation begins to show the cracks in their marriage. They discover the private journals that Amy has been writing for years, where she confesses that their marriage isn't as perfect as they allow people to believe that it is. Everyone begins to suspect Nick as her killer. If you want some edge-of-your-seat drama, some twists that you would never even imagine could happen, then Gone Girl is the book for you. The Bad Seed by William Murch. This classic psychological thriller presents you with the question of how do you keep up the facade of a perfect life when you live in fear of your 8-year-old child. Rhoda is your typical precocious, intelligent, charming little girl. Her mother, Christine, is spending the summer alone with Rhoda, while her husband is out of town for business. As tragic events around Rhoda begin to unfold, Christine starts to question the true nature of her child. The brilliance of the writing of this story gave way to a whole new generation of the evil children stories. It inspired a Broadway show and an incredibly performed movie. If you haven't ever seen it, definitely pick it up. It will leave you questioning all of the children in your life. For those of you who are the true die-hard fans, Halloween would not be complete without a good dash of Edgar Allan Poe. If you've never read anything by Edgar Allan Poe, I would start with his most popular works like A Telltale Heart or The Raven. My personal favorites are The Black Cat, Annabelle Lee, and The Cask of Amontillado. Pick up the story, read them a little bit at a time, have one for every night of the season. There is so much spookiness to be found with Edgar Allan Poe, you will not be disappointed. Hopefully there is something in this list that will make your October reading a little bit spookier. Please let me know in the comments below what your personal brand of horror story is, and if you need another recommendation for a category I may not have touched on, let me know. I'd be happy to give you a few good suggestions. And if I haven't scared you away yet, please be sure to subscribe to my channel, followed by the little bell next to it, so you'll be notified every time there's a new video on my channel. If this list gave you a few good ideas for your October TBR, be sure to like this video. Now be sure to turn on all the lights and check under your bed and closets before you go to sleep. Until next time!